Alright, so I actually recorded a whole video talking generally about how I think pass rush as a whole is overrated, not just TJ Watt. I actually love TJ Watt as a player. He's probably the best edge in the league. However, I don't think he should be getting paid anywhere near as much as he is. I don't think any edge rushers should. So that's going to be the main part about this video. It's more about edge rushers than it is about TJ Watt as a whole. But with the TJ Watt deal just getting released, where he's getting $28 million a year for 4 years, I figured this is perfect timing to release it now. So yeah, without further ado, let me now cut to previous Jackson, who is unaware that TJ Watt is going to get signed in a couple of hours. So this is admittedly one of my more controversial takes. However, I feel strongly about it, and the numbers do back this up. There's a lot of data to back this up. There's not a lot of data to talk about the contrary, other than just quotes from successful football people, which is something, but I would need more than that to make a decision on how valuable I think pass rush is. This all started when I made a video sort of looking at the positional value between certain positions. I simply just looked at how good a certain team was at a specific thing, like rushing the passer or receiving, and then said how well does that translate to how many points they score or how many points they give up, and just want to see what has the biggest corollary between being a good football team and being not so good. And to my surprise, pass rush was very overrated. It matters, but not that much, which surprised me. But the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. And I wanted to make a video really explaining why pass rush doesn't matter that much, to be honest, and why people shouldn't be, paying TJ Watt. So let's get into this sort of breakdown and talk about why I feel the way I feel. So we'll start off right here. So what you're looking at here, best means the team that finished first in pressures, how many pressures did they get? And then you have the team that finished last in pressures, how many pressures did they get? And then all the way over to the right, that's just the differential. I'm using pressures as many feel as though pressures is a more accurate stat than just using sacks. It's just simply a more sustainable stat. So that's why I'm using pressures here. So you see the average difference between the best team in the league and the worst team in the league in terms of pressures is about 97. So that's what you're getting from going from the worst pass rush in the NFL to the best pass rush in the NFL. Except, of course, that's not exactly how that works. For one thing, right here you see that the blitz percentage of a team who's top 3 in pressures is 32.3, whereas the blitz percentage of a team who's bottom 3 in pressures is 24.0, which of course makes sense. If you blitz more, you're going to generate more pressures. That's obvious, but that is a factor that can kind of skew this data a little bit. Teams at the top of the list blitz more, so it's not necessarily because they have talented pass rushers, it's also because they have a defensive coordinator who blitzes. So I think using this will actually give us a more accurate representation where I'm using the average pressures from the top 5 pass rush defenses, according to Pro Football Focus. They just look at the talent of the players individually without any of the external stuff. And if you look at the top 5 most talented pass rush defenses, the average pressures they'll get is 171.8. And again, the worst pressures in the NFL is 97.7. So that's probably a more accurate representation of how much extra pressures you're getting from getting the most talented pass rush group. As I wrote on the bottom, the amount of pressures you gain from going from the least talented pass rush to a top 5 most talented pass rush gets you, on average, 74.1 additional pressures. It is a bit of a small sample size. I can only use 3 seasons. That's how long pressures has been a stat on Pro Football Reference. So bit of a small sample size, but that feels right. And, each year tends to be about the same, more or less. So I think it's fine to use that. According to SB Nation, it's on an article, which I will put in the description if you want to take a look at that and figure out how they created that data. A pressure is worth an estimated total of 0.41 points. Now, this does not mean that it goes from 0 to 0.41. It means that it goes from whatever the expected value is on that play to 0.41 points less, meaning you only add about 30.4 points a season from going from the least talented pass rush to the most talented pass rush. That's not a ton. And even if you think that I shouldn't be factoring in the talent stuff, it should just be best and worst, you only add 39.77 points a season, from going from the least amount of pressures in the NFL to the most amount of pressures in the NFL. One win is worth roughly 40 points. So the fact that you're getting basically less than a win from having the most talented pass rush as opposed to the least talented pass rush, or even most pressures in general as opposed to least pressures in general, kind of shows that a pressure really isn't as valuable as people think it is. Now, going from 0 pressures to the best in the league is worth 79.95 points, so that's about 2 wins, which is a lot more significant. It's still less wins than, say, a good coverage unit, good receiving core. It's a little bit more than a good offensive line, and it's obviously less than a good quarterback. So that's kind of where we're at there. That feels a lot better, and I think people would, that sits right in our heads a lot more. But you have to keep in mind, you don't go from 0 to 79.95 points just from adding talent. Even having just guys you sign off the street to be your defensive line, they're going to get some pressure. So you can't go from 0. That's not how that works. Let me use this as a better example. So TJ Watt had 61 pressures in 2020. I think this will be a better way to visualize why exactly this, TJ Watt isn't as valuable as people think he is, even though I think he's an awesome player. It's just a positional complaint, really. So 61 pressures in 2020. That means TJ Watt added 25.01 points. That feels like a good amount. That seems like a lot, although you have to also factor in a replacement level player adds 9.4 points. That's just, I use that data based on, if you look at the least amount of pressures a team will have every season. I also factored in blitzing, so I counted one blitzer just as an extra defensive lineman. So typically a replacement level player will add 9.4 points compared to 0, as if there was no one out there. So TJ Watt only gets the difference there. He doesn't get the full 25.01 points. This is the same thing that they do with Moneyball in baseball. WAR, it's calculated the same way. Wins above replacement level. So TJ Watt added 15.61 points last season. That's how much he added if the difference between him and a replacement level player. That was his points above replacement level. A kicker is worth 26.8 points above replacement level if they're a top 5 kicker. So yes, this is going to sound crazy. You guys are going to hate me, but the numbers back this up. There is data to prove this. Justin Tucker is more valuable than TJ Watt. So there you go, Ravens fans. I'm sure you'll be happy to hear that. But, you think about that's why a team like Baltimore will let their edge rushers walk. They're just not as valuable as people think that they are. And it's not because they're not good. It's a positional thing. The average team spends $21.47 million on a win. That's if, you divide the salary cap next year by 8.5 wins. That's average. You want to do better than that because you don't want to win just 8.5 games, but that's what you expect a team to spend on a win. That's how much a win costs for a fair value. Meaning TJ Watt would be worth $8.4 million in 2021 if he gets 61 pressures again. Now, he could get more, of course, because there is an extra game, but he's worth under $10 million. So there's some value there, but I also have to keep in mind, you have to keep in mind that you don't want to just make fair contracts. You want to get better contracts. You want to find additional value. So signing TJ Watt doesn't help the Steelers if they pay him $8.4 million in 2021 and he gets the same amount of pressures he usually gets. He would have to all of a sudden become an even better player, which seems unlikely because he's already so great. Or you have to get him for less money, which is just not going to happen because a team will pay him, possibly $30 million. Again, I know this is basically going against everything that we've been taught as football fans. And honestly, when I first read Moneyball, I was kind of confused as to why Billy Beane would always say, I would go out of my way to get guys who didn't play baseball before and weren't big baseball fans because they could look at the numbers in a more analytical way. And I never understood that until I started getting into analytics and football, and now I really understand it. Because a lot of cliches that we believe in are just cliches. They don't actually mean anything. And again, we shouldn't believe in something just because there's, famous people who have said it, especially when a lot of the people that we talk about who have said these things said it like 30 years ago when football was a completely different sport. The game has changed. We need to be changing with it. And the reality is, I don't know about 30 years from now, but right now, pass rush it doesn't matter as much as people think it does. And when you're handing out $20+ million contracts to every good pass rusher, the good teams are going to not do that and spend that money on areas where they can improve more, and it's going to be going to make a lot more sense, quite frankly. One of the biggest counter arguments I've heard to this is when people just list off individual teams that did really well and say, well, they got there on the strength of their pass rush. Clearly, pass rush can help you win a Super Bowl. And that's just not a good argument, quite frankly, because looking at individual anecdotes doesn't necessarily mean that that's the case. Luck does play a factor in football, but also some of the most common ones I've used, there's other things that are the reason for it. It's not just pass rush. Like the 2017 Eagles is a great example, a team that was sort of known for having great offensive line, great defensive line, and they did. They had the best offensive line in football, which matters. I think offensive line matters more than a pass rush does, although probably it's better to go from the inside out as opposed to the outside in, which again goes against conventional wisdom there, but that's probably true. But what's important to talk about with the 2017 Eagles is, I'm using Pro Football Focus grades for where they had them. They had the 3rd best coverage unit that year, the 4th best quarterback play that year, and the 8th best receiving play that year, a mediocre run defense, but as a whole, they were pretty much loaded everywhere else. So, yeah, they had a great pass rush. They had a great team. They were just a complete team altogether. So that was a factor. Again, pass rush does matter, but you need other stuff. The 2019 49ers, another example, they had the 3rd best pass rush that year, went to the Super Bowl, but they also had the best coverage unit and the best receiving core that year as well. So, again, there's other factors. Maybe the best example you could use if you're trying to counter this argument would be the 2015 Broncos, because they had the 2nd best pass rush, but they also had the best run defense and the 3rd best coverage unit. So even though their offense wasn't great, 21st overall, they definitely had a loaded defense, and so I think that was a big factor there, even though the talent on offense wasn't necessarily there. Again, pass rush factored in, but I think the other factors were also much bigger. That's just what the numbers tell me. And again, I don't look at things and say, oh, well, if everyone thinks that it's, pass rush is important, I guess I gotta as well. Prove it to me. And I have not seen someone prove it to me at all that pass rush is very valuable. That's just the way I see it. If you disagree, well, fine. But you have to have a reason. You can't just disagree because you disagree. You have to have, I need to see evidence supporting the fact that pass rush is super important for me to feel it's super important. There just isn't the evidence there that I've seen, but I haven't seen everything. So if you have new information, feel free to tweet it at me. I'd love to hear it. But yeah, that's my thought on why pass rush is overrated. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Try not to kill me too much in the comments, but if you do, hey, that's part of the fun. If I didn't want to get killed in the comments, I wouldn't have made this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.